Okay, we're live, everybody. Thank you all for coming. This is our last panel of the day. And appropriately, it will be 4:20 at some point during this panel.
There's no consuming at McManaman's.
That's right. Outside. This is the Wide World of Weed panel. It was organized and sponsored by Siren Nation. Siren Nation is a nonprofit that works to promote women in the arts and to create performance, exhibition, and discussion opportunities. And there is a great deal of art involved in everything that you guys do, I think, even though it's it may seem a little off topic. We have an amazing lineup of panelists here. They're all going to introduce themselves in a minute. If you want something in writing about them in Siren Nation, grab one of the pink programs by the table by the door, on the table by the door on your way out. It's got everyone's bios, websites, all the good stuff. And now I'm going to let Samantha take it away.
Thank you so much, Anina. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Yeah. This is so exciting to us. Welcome to the 11th Annual Siren Nation Festival. Have you got to check out some cool things today? I hope everybody had a chance to check out the Arts Festival, and I went to a really great panel on podcasting earlier. I just really appreciate everything that Siren Nation does for women in the arts all around Portland and beyond. Just really excited to be here. So, my name is Samantha Montanero, and I'll be your moderator today as we discuss the ever-so-hot topic of legal cannabis. Panelists, thank you so much for being here. Emma Chasen is the newest panelist this year, but these other 4 women were here last year, and just really excited to continue. As I was coming up with what I was going to ask and what we were going to talk about today, it was really cool to look at my transcript from a year ago. A year in cannabis time is like centuries, right? It's like, oh my God, so much has happened. So just really cool to look back at where we were a year ago and where we are now and where are we going. So many interesting things. So we only have 60 minutes here. We'll do our best to stay on task so that we can have some time at the end for some questions. But first we'll start with introductions. I'll start and then we can just go down the line. So I'm Samantha Montanero. I founded Prism House PDX 2.5 years ago, which is a cannabis events and graphic design company. So I come from an artistic background. Like Anina was just saying, I think something interesting is like, I don't know how weed kind of fits into women in the arts. I guarantee you that like all women involved in cannabis were or are involved in the arts in some way, right? Like it's there's so many synchronicities there. And I have been doing cannabis events here in Portland for the last 2.5 years. In the beginning of this year, in January, I helped start a cannabis event series for women with Lisa Snyder, who's right here in the red hair, called Tokeativity. And we do cannabis events for women. Our intention is to nurture a safe space for women to connect, create, and learn anything that follows under that umbrella. So workshops, panels, networking events, socials, online community type stuff. So please, there's a lot of women in the house here. If you haven't heard of Tokeativity, please connect with us after. It's a great place to follow up about the conversations that happen today and beyond. It's a great place to meet other women interested in cannabis or who like to consume cannabis. And just be, our goal is really to help empower women to like take what they learn from that space and bring it into their own lives to be more empowered in whatever it is that they're trying to do. So I could talk forever about all the things I've been doing lately, but it's more about you ladies. So let's pass it down. Amy Margolis.
Hi, my name's Amy Margolis, and I'm an attorney with a firm called Green Spoon Barter, and we have a national cannabis law practice. And I've been touching this space long before anyone called it a space or the industry or anything like that. I also founded and work with great people to found the Oregon Cannabis Association. In February of next year, we will have been around for 4 years, and we just crossed the 300 member threshold, which is very, very exciting. I brought my son with me, who's in the back, because last year you told us that we should talk about happy things and smile, and I'm not feeling very smiley these days about where women are sitting.
Did you notice how I didn't suggest that?
Yeah, I know, I did.
I was like, let's just be real. It's hard out there.
Part of, I think, making sure that we are constantly moving forward is not just raising our girls to be strong, but also raising our boys in the right way. So I could see him back there. He knows what we're talking about. So anyway, that's a little bit about me, and I appreciate being here every single time I come. So thanks for having me.
My name is Emma Chasen. I got started in the legal cannabis industry just about 2 years ago, over 2 years now, and I started out in the retail environment. So I started out as a bud tender and moved my way up the chain, general manager, and then eventually carved out a role for myself called Director of Education, because I really noticed the extreme lack of training in the retail space. And to me, that is unacceptable. It is the crucial link. Bud tenders are the crucial link to the consumer market. They're the ones who are informing consumer decisions. They're the ones who oftentimes are interfacing with customers and patients about their health care, and also they're representing the entire market behind them. So to not have any training on that front is unacceptable, and I set out to change that. I do have a degree in medicinal plant research, pre-medical studies. I also have coordinated oncology clinical trials, so I've kind of used my foundational science knowledge to develop a cannabis science program, and I do a lot of teaching with Sativa Science Club, where we try to teach on everything from cannabis botany to compassionate client care, because I think that it's a really important need for our community, especially if we want to continue moving forward in a way that feels good and in a way that helps us to destigmatize. And education is my approach to destigmatizing cannabis. If we can talk about cannabis in a reasonable, logical way, if we can substantiate with facts, and if we can also come from like a really empathetic heart place with people, then it's really hard for even those people who have such negative ideas about cannabis to continue to hold on to them. And so my official title, I guess, is Cannabis Educator and Industry Consultant, because I also work with some brands to do educational marketing campaigns. But really, my mission-driven goal is this bud tender and community education.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Andi Bixel. I have a company called Drip Sweets that was formerly Drip Ice Cream and is now about to make its transition as we launch a new product next week. I like to create products that sort of like set people up for a joyful experience with cannabis, and products that are approachable, that are shareable, that are comfortable, that feel like you can be confident in what you're getting yourself into. And I also drive community and arts and creativity around those things, and I'm focusing on also destigmatizing through creating a community of doers and makers and thinkers and players.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Trista Okel. My company is Empower BodyCare. We've been making cannabis-infused topicals since 2013. Started in the medical market and made the transition last year into, at the end of the year, into the rec system. Right now, we're actually in the process of expanding to Washington State with a licensing partner up there, so we're really excited about that. And we are very mission-driven as well. Our whole purpose is to educate consumers, also to act as cannabis ambassadors. So, and topicals are a great way to do that. So people who would normally never use a cannabis product will sometimes use a topical, and then open up their eyes and their hearts and minds to other forms of cannabis that we work with them as well. Empower, in case you don't know, stands for End Marijuana Prohibition, Organize Women, and Act Reform, and that's what we try to do every day. Yes.
Hi everyone, I'm Preece. I'm really thankful to be here. First of all, it's pretty exciting to continuously be amongst such amazing women, and to be around people that want to see change and make change and normalize this plant. So thank you, first of all. I guess I would label myself as an entrepreneur and an activist. Previously, I have a horticulture degree by trade, which is what got me into the industry. And then I co-founded a cannabis-centric analytical lab labs, so testing for potency, pesticide, terpenes. And then I founded Ethical Cannabis Alliance, which looked at organic meets fair trade certification within the industry that doesn't exist for us because we can't access it. And I'm on to New Adventures, which I can't disclose too much information, but it's basically a friendly cannabis space, kind of wellness space that will include internal nutrition and movement externally and living plants. So stay tuned for that.
Awesome, thank you. Impressive panel, right? Like, wow. There's a few seats. Does anybody want to take this moment to come and sit down? There's 3 up here. Is that it? The rest of the house, there's 1 over here. If anybody wants to take a seat, this would be a good time. Cool. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to ask two questions as just kind of talking points. We can just kind of go down, or I mean, I want y'all to just be comfortable. If you have something to say, just go ahead and pipe up, and we'll just kind of have a discussion over the next 15 or so minutes about these couple topics, and then I'm going to have 1 question for each of the panelists. So 2 years ago, Marijuana Business Daily reported that women make up 36% of executives in cannabis-related companies, compared to about 22% of senior managers in other industries, just 4.2% of CEO positions at Fortune 500 companies, even less at tech companies. This year, I found this really fascinating. This week, actually, a new article came out. I've been dying for information. It's like, what do these statistics look like now, 2 years later? I mean, things had to have shifted, right? What is it looking like? Unfortunately, this year, the percentage of women entrepreneurs in cannabis, the general number of entrepreneurs has not changed, which I think is interesting. Maybe some are coming on and some are falling off, and that's just kind of being cyclical. But female pot executives, it dropped from 36% to 27%. So it's been almost 4 years since recreational cannabis was legalized in Colorado, 2 since Oregon. My question to the panelists is, do you think the cannabis industry has actually been more inclusive to women and minorities? And more so, in the future, what can we do to help more women and minorities get into these executive roles?
Let's just go down the...
Yeah, I think, go ahead and, let's just do that.
So I think if we're being, can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
I think if we're being honest in this room and in this space, women are disadvantaged overall when it comes to the number of executive and CEO positions that they hold. I went to this awards ceremony in New York, I don't know, a month or 2 ago, and it was for women CEOs. And the statistics are horrifying. And to think that now in this day and age that there are so few women in executive positions of power and in decision-making positions of power in companies that it doesn't, put aside cannabis for a second, put aside that like this is a new industry and there should be opportunity for women because this is just being born. We are so underrepresented across the board. And from my perspective, and I posted, we were all on a Facebook chain with each other, which sounds stupid to say out loud, but talking about this statistic, and I think about, we help hundreds of businesses, and that I almost never see, unless they are, smaller women-owned businesses, when I see institutional investors come in, when I see, especially in California, these kind of much bigger companies that are coming online, when I see people who are coming from different capital markets, I am almost never talking to women. And I also very strongly feel that even in my position, that I have to fight twice as hard for what I have. And I have been a lawyer for a long time. I have built a lot of things. I think I know exactly what I'm talking about. But even then, I am fighting for airtime with the blue blazers and khaki pants and braided belts. Like, I am. And I saw that statistic and have reflected on my own experience, both individually and just what I see like coming through the door, I wondered how we could change that. And I think we should also think about, and I'm hesitant to talk about it, but I think we need to, the recent disclosures, many disclosures of many brave women and some brave men about the kind of harassment that we face in the workplace, that we face when we're dealing with colleagues. I won't talk about it because Noah's here, but there are so many challenges. So I've been thinking all day about how we can change that. What does that look like? And it starts with us, at least from my perspective, not being so afraid to speak up. And I mean that in both ways. I mean that in terms of when we are treated poorly, but I also mean in speaking truth to power when it comes to businesses and decision making. It means when we know what the right thing to do is, to not be intimidated, and it's okay to admit to being intimidated. I'm intimidated sometimes too. To not be intimidated, to think we know what the answer is, that we should be guiding the conversation, that we should be providing the direction for how a business is growing. But we need to go take that. We have such an uphill battle because, no offense to the men in here, many, many men just think they know better than us. And you know what? They do not. I am telling you, they do not. So, I mean, I could go, I think, like you on forever, but what I hope you take away from that statistic is that it's really super disappointing, but that means we have to work twice as hard. We have to talk twice as loud. We have to make sure that we don't diminish our value and give away our businesses that we start because we need money or we need help, that we don't relinquish control because we feel like we don't know what to do or someone has told us we don't know what to do. And so I think that is for this year in cannabis. So when we come back next year, that statistic looks different, is for us to own what should be ours and speak up for it. So, thank you.
I really appreciate that we are talking about this statistic because I feel like the media has generally done a disservice to women over the past year by claiming that we have 50% stake in this industry. I've seen a lot of media coverage in the past year and even before that cannabis is the first industry where there's truly equality. This is brand new, blah, blah, blah. And I mean, I think that they're pulling from the amount of women who are in the industry and not necessarily looking at CEO and executive positions. And I think that it does us a general disservice by then making our community go complacent, where it gives us a sense of complacency, where we've already done it. We've already gained equal footing in this industry. But actually, as we see from that statistic, that is so not true. The amount of women who are working in bud tender or trimmer positions, I'm sure there are a lot of women working in those positions, but the amount of women that are in CEO and executive positions it's not equitable with men. And I think that this also, I kind of see it in my mind as something that's equal to like colorblindness. For us to talk about race, we've already won race, we figured it out. That creates a sense of complacency, right? And as we know over the last few years, that has gotten dredged up because we have not figured out race. And I think that talking about that conversation in respect to the cannabis industry is so important because we don't see many minorities, many people of color having loud voices in this space. And I want them to have loud voices in this space, especially because the drug war was largely started to incriminate Black people, to incriminate people of color, and to just put them into a new type of slavery, right? Just to funnel them into prison systems. And now we have an amazing legal market. We have an amazing legal industry, and yet the minorities who suffered through the drug war are not gaining equal footing in this space. And so why is that? And I think about that a lot, because even when I was hiring for a dispensary, I would try and I wanted to hire people of color, and the applicant pool was 99% white. And I didn't know, and I didn't understand why until actually I went to a Tokeativity event with Ethical Cannabis, where we were talking about certain injustices that we saw in the industry. And there were some amazing black women there who were like sharing their experiences, and it was wonderful to hear their perspective, because what they were sharing with us was that there is like such residual trauma in that space, and such fear of this is still not okay. I could still get in trouble. And I think that all of us deal with that on a certain level because the federal government isn't on board, and the federal government is nuts right now. But it's so much worse for people of color because there's so much more at stake. And just in that event, in having things like Tokeativity and having other kind of safe spaces for everybody, for all women, for all genders, for all people of color, and really having the opportunity to amplify those voices is so important. It's so important. And by establishing those connections, I mean, I made connections with those people in the room, those two amazing women, and like have been able to kind of help mentor them and get them to a space where they can have a voice in the community. And we need to do more of that. We need more events like that. We need more panels like this where we can talk about those injustices so that we can amplify the voices of people of color, because they should have, just as women should have, an equal say in the conversation.
Thank you. We got to clip along with this. Is there someone who wants to make a short comment? Trista?
Yeah, so as a female entrepreneur who has 99% of my team just happens to be women, and we will actually promote from within and train, train in management and that kind of thing in order to empower them. Yes, I know we use the word a lot at work. A couple of things I think that we can do is we can choose to either not partner with companies that don't raise women to the executive level, or we can also put pressure on the companies that are coming into the market that do not have women executives, but maybe have a whole bunch of brand ambassadors that are women, right? Like, we can actually apply pressure in that way. And we can also partner with companies like Yerba Buena, which we do. Laura's in the back there, who also have women in leadership roles in their organization. So those are the kinds of things that I just wanted to add.
I love that. I think that that's so important. I know for myself, since starting Tokeativity with Lisa and like choosing women-owned businesses, I just choose women-owned businesses now. Yeah. It's like I have a lot of buying power. That's a really easy way to just support those. But I like what you're saying about putting pressure on those other businesses that are not creating equality in their workplace. I love that. We could talk about each of these all day long. Okay. Let's shift a little bit here, because as you know, I have to tell you, like, working in cannabis for 2.5 years now, it's like over not even that much time, it gets really comfy cozy, and it's like, oh yeah, legal weed. This is a very regular part of my life, and there's so much work to be done beyond Oregon, beyond Portland. I mean, in Portland, for God's sakes, there's so much to be done still. A lot of people don't agree with cannabis legalization, and I wanted to bring this up. Anti-drug lobbyists argue that the legalization of cannabis will certainly lead to negative impacts on our children, like earlier use, addiction, accidental consumption due to edibles that are attractive to children, etc. The claims go on and on. I went to Salem for one of my first times this year to go and advocate, and the anti-lobbyists are like, this is their only claim that they seem to kind of have still, that some people are like, well, maybe it's not good for kids. So my question here is this claim is intimidating and powerful despite compelling studies showing otherwise. Because if you're a parent, you do know that in many ways your life revolves around keeping your children safe. I know that's the case for me and my son. So what are your thoughts about child safety with cannabis? If you have children, what are you doing at home to ensure the safety? Really, like anything around this topic. Ashley, if you want to start, I know you're a mama.
Yeah.
If you want to start this, and
I think it's really interesting that this was one of the questions we had last year too, if you guys remember. And I'm on the same page as I was then, that I tend to think that cannabis is safer than alcohol, and I think most consumers would agree to some extent. I know there are things that can shift that. Edibles, obviously, at different doses can be, a little bit scarier. But all in all, I would rather hide a bottle of alcohol in a safe space away from my child, locked away, than a flower. And I do not hide much of anything from my child. I educate her. She was in a grow room at the age of when she was born. She was helping water when she was able to walk, and she has seen the flower, and we talk about the plant, and we look at it, and we talk about it just like it's a dogwood outside. So to her, it's not abnormal. I don't sit in front of her and consume copious amounts of cannabis like you wouldn't alcohol. Like, you don't abuse it in front of your children, but there's also a safety issue at hand too, like edibles and like some other things where kids. I see where the fear comes in the normal or the general public, where the fear is around cannabis. But with education, we can change that. So not only educating the general public, but also educating the children.
I think that's so important. I know for myself with my kid, my 9-year-old can tell you a lot about cannabis. He can really tell you a lot. I mean, he knows that terpenes exist. He knows, he knows that I use different things for different times, and he's like, it's a plant. Hello, it's not a big deal to him. Andi, I want to direct this towards you because you're making edibles and ice cream. You're making ice cream and another edible product. Have you run into some things, or like when you were developing those products, what was kind of, what were some thoughts that you had around that?
I mean, I think it always just is going to keep coming back to the education part of things, because no matter what packaging you put an edible in, there's still, like, the person who might not hide the edible in their, like, secret counter might also leave it open, so it's really just a matter of, like, trying to encourage people to get a special drawer that's, like, up high, that isn't where their kids can reach it, and really just talking to them about the fact that this is special ice cream, or this is a special treat that is not for kids. And I've been around a lot of friends and their children, and the way they understand drip ice cream is, like, not for them. So it really is just, like, I try to remind people through the education that I do through my channels, and, like, talk with the dispensaries about how they can, encourage people to find these safe spaces to leave their treats.
I do just offer, and I said this last year, I was having a flashback. I mean, I think I was the sort of other end of this conversation, and I say the other end of this conversation, which is, and I'm not a maker, I'm a lawyer, and we don't make anything. So I mean, obviously Noah knows what I do, but I think from a political perspective, and I actually said, I think all of this last time, I think we cannot dismiss the public health arguments. There are public health concerns, just like there are public health concerns with anything you put in your body that alters the way you perceive reality. And I agree that cannabis is medicine. I agree that it should be legal. I agree that the drug war has disproportionately impacted minorities and people of color. That being said, I recognize that there are public health concerns, and I think to dismiss those is not a successful political tactic. And I think we saw that in the consumption conversation in Salem. I mean, you're butting up against that, and to just say it's not true or that concern is not real is counterproductive. We have, and what I tell Noah, and what I will always tell Noah, is that you are not an adult, and you should not be making adult choices. And I mean that for everything. I mean that for alcohol. I mean that for cannabis. I mean that for other things. I definitely mean that for guns and sex. So I think there is a middle place for that conversation, and I think about it both from a political conversation, and I think about it from, how I talk to Noah.
Mm-hmm. I think that's really interesting. I wanted to repeat that question because I think that it's one of the biggest things that some people, even a lot of people who are using cannabis and like living in a legal space, work in the cannabis industry or whatever else, that I hear constantly that they kind of still don't know exactly how to talk to their kids about it, or they don't know exactly what's okay and what's not okay. And I think that this conversation is just going to continually evolve. I'm a huge fan of the warning symbol. My son Carmine's very familiar with that, and I'm like, you see anything with this that you look at the packaging, you look at the label of the food you're eating, of the drinks you're drinking, of everything, he looks at the label, because that's what I do too. And it's like, if it has that symbol, this is not for you. And I think that that's a helpful tool, and if we can, maybe as this evolves, we come up with more educational tools. Maybe there's some things, if cannabis legalization, when cannabis legalization continues to sweep the nation, maybe there's programs that are implemented into public schools. Maybe we take it a step further. I absolutely think that that should be done, and I think this conversation just needs to continually happen. And I definitely implore all of you to open that conversation as parents, if you're a parent, to talk about this with your friends and see where you find yourself feeling comfortable, because I think it's definitely a personal choice still right now in a big way. So, okay, cool. Let's get on to individual questions. So I am going to start with Ashley. The cannabis industry has been expanding rapidly, and there are only a few new systems in place to uphold the standards of best business practices. This is so important because cannabis as an agricultural plant, which is consumed by us humans, there's so many factors there, right? Like we're consuming this, we're lighting this, do people consume it in all sorts of different ways? There's so many concerns. And then you go to the business practices, which there haven't been a lot of guidelines on what businesses can and can't do. So can you share your thoughts on quality and equality in cannabis production?
Yeah, I think that's it's two almost completely different. So I'm going to focus on instead of quality, because there are a lot of efforts around quality, including organic production or close to indoors is kind of a twist on organic. But so as far as equality goes and social justice, right now, as far as I know to date, there are only 2 documents that have been published, and they're both out of Colorado, around safety within cannabis production. So they outline kind of like OSHA rules and regulations, which is great. The wheel has started to turn around that. And there is a larger group called ASTM. It's an international group that helps write standards, kind of on the same level though, like safety and health, not so much social justice and living wages, the next tier up. So because of where the industry came from, there are inherent risks that I'm sure if you start thinking about like this came from the illicit market. There are still grows where there are some awkward and horrible and inappropriate circumstances still happening to date. So starting those conversations, number 1, talking about the issues where we came from and what's happening behind the scenes, and then bringing that to the front of the scene. So number 1, talking about it, and number 2, actually addressing that there are still issues in the illicit workplace. So because we can't access some of these federal programs, we have to internally, as an industry, create programs ourselves. So unfortunately, each state is its own island right now because of rules and regulations. So it's a really interesting concept to try to encompass, but number 1, talking about it, and number 2, continuing to go to events such as Tokeativity and talk about these social issues within the industry. But I am seeing it become more more of a topic again and again. But I also think Oregon is a unique bubble where we tend to be a little bit ahead of the curve when it comes to these kind of topics. So.
For people, can I actually get a little? Can everybody raise their hand if you work in cannabis or somehow tied in the industry? Can you raise your hand?
We used to ask that question, and nobody would answer it because there was always law enforcement in the room. So, like,
that's really cool. I was going to ask you, I wanted to get like a snapshot as to who is involved, because I think some of the practices that maybe people don't understand are happening. Can you list some of the things like unethical business practices that are happening really regularly all the time right now?
Well, I guess illicit or licit market. I mean, when you think about the illicit market, so there's growers, usually men who are in the backcountry, and they've been growing with them and their buddies for a while, and they want a trim crew, and they bring a bunch of girls in. And right there, you can already start to think about it. One person, when I was explaining the situation, they replied with, "Oh, that's like going to a bar and getting drunk with everybody, and then everyone stays the night there." And I'm like, yeah, that's pretty much what it is. And it kind of tends to bring in other drugs, and so living situations are inappropriate. Sometimes there's not even running water or heat, like all these crazy things. Then when you look at the illicit market, that trickles in. So that trickles in, whether it's work ethic or work environment or your working conditions. It does trickle into the industry. So you can kind of think of even about ergonomics, about how you sit in one place. And I'm still hearing kind of awkward things about like the industry progressing, but people are still kind of encompassing this weird like sweatshop scenario. So breaking that, talking about it, and bringing people up to, everyone needs to be on the same page with each other in this industry and not the 1%. So if there's a bunch of people sitting in a room, just minimal pay and all these working conditions that are slightly inappropriate but acceptable, we need to break that, and we need to pay a living wage, and we need to consider health care for maybe upper management instead of just kind of this making your bottom line every month. But I'm really going deep there.
Thank you so much for talking about that a little bit. I know like each of these conversations are their own epic like hour-long thing, but just want to get a snapshot. Thanks for sharing that. And I think, Trista, this like can really tie in here. So I remember about a year ago, you shared a story with me about your journey into creating Empower packaging when some of the regulations changed, and the struggles that you endured to hold your company to the sustainability and best practice standards that you hold for yourself and what you purchase. I know this about you. Trista is like a long time just like earth activist. Just like, like champion for our earth, and just like fighting for sustainability and for all of that kind of stuff. So I remember you were just sharing how awful it was, like trying to figure out your packaging and to be able to be like cool with just yourself. Like, what are you putting out into the world? You need to feel good about that, right? And that it was so difficult for you to do that. So as this industry grows and shifts, what are your views on sustainable and ethical business practices, as well as best practices in taking care of your employees and your team?
Oh, wow. Okay, so that's also two issues.
Yep.
So I think as the industry grows and shifts, or as we grow as a company also, it becomes more and more important actually to focus on sustainability and keeping our ethics and standards high within not just Empower, but within the entire industry, right? So for me, just to focus on that is most important because I don't want to have a huge footprint, right? I don't want to just create consumer products that get thrown away, right? So people can recycle them, or I can use recyclable packaging, that kind of thing. Like I said, that staying on board with that is most important for me. Also, as we grow, it becomes ever more important to take care of the team. The same way that we took care of the 4 people last year, the 12 that we have this year, we are focusing on bringing them up with us, taking care of them last year this time, we were shut down, right? This year, we offer PTO, health insurance, living wages.
Yeah.
You know? And by doing that and talking about it, it's not a pat on the back. It's not like, self-congratulatory. Yes, it is. Actually, the whole reason that I talk about it is to try and lift up other companies to do the same thing. And also to apply peer pressure.
Peer pressure used for positivity. I like it.
Right? So, and as the market evolves and more competition enters the market, I think that people will want to, at least in places like Oregon, people will want to support businesses that do the same, right? So I make a lot of my buying choices based on how the companies take care of their employees, whether they use ethical and sustainable sourcing and farming practices. Again, I'm a huge fan of Laura's in the back because Yerba Buena does all the same things and probably more than we do to maintain that. So
that's really cool. Thank you. Thanks for setting an example for what other people should be doing.
I'm just doing what's right for us,
Humanity.
Yeah, and if I can chime in there, like, this is kind of sentimental, but in my opinion, I think that we have to take care of each other first. There's a lot around the sustainability of the earth, which is really important, but like when it comes down to it, we have to make each other feel good to make the, everything continue on.
It's also, it's interesting to see, like, as I'm also a woman business owner who's making the decisions of how my company is structured and how I'm hiring and how I'm promoting, and I think it's also something that's really cool for us to be in this place to offer our sort of like tenderness and understanding of what we need as human beings to be happy in our workplace and to therefore like make very special things.
Right.
That's perfect. That totally ties into what your question is. So Andi, Andi, as an artist, you've been known for creating unique experiences in Portland and beyond for years. Can you share with us how your ritual around cannabis consumption, both personal and in groups, has shaped your business? And maybe if you want to touch on using storytelling and how you've used that with Drip and your own rituals and your own storytelling with Drip to make that a compelling brand.
Yeah, I think sort of on the ritual side, I think it's really interesting to look at our cannabis consumption from both a personal use, in the personal use realm, and then in the shared experiences realm. So it's kind of like I use Drip products because really they were the first thing that hyper connected with me, because I was trying to understand what was happening to me with different doses and in different moods and in different, I sort of like started in the experiment phase of like, it would be cool to make weed ice cream, to just like have this really detailed journaling going on, where I was like spending a lot of time alone, either like consuming cannabis and making something, or just laying on the floor listening to a record or whatever. I spent a lot of time doing a lot of different activities alone, pushing sort of like what boundaries I could find and where cannabis could take me to.
You should publish that journal one day, by the way. I would be interested to read what kind of drip tips you had.
Weird stuff. And it's been really cool to then translate this work that I've put in experimenting with myself and where I can take my journeys to sharing it with my friends. Like I don't actually come from a group of stoners necessarily. Like I've introduced weed to a lot of my friends, and it's really been interesting to watch particularly having products that feel really approachable and easy for people. Like people are open to trying a bite of ice cream, even if they're a little bit skeptical of trying cannabis, because it feels like it's opening up space for something completely new, because people haven't seen it, they haven't tried it, nobody's had a bad experience with like black market weed ice cream. Like,
brownies on the other hand, good luck. Good luck.
Cool. So it's just been really cool to push this, push the social side of sharing cannabis to all different places. Like I've hosted brunches where we just like make food and get kind of weird and like maybe draw or paint or like have things around to explore together or separately in my home. And I've also like done other events with strangers, just sort of, I think it's really important for us who have taken time to experiment with the plant to share with people what we can do when we are under its influence, because I think a lot of people still, although the vision is changing, a lot of people still think of consuming cannabis meaning going home and sitting on the couch for the evening and not really igniting the brain, sort of more like making it more dormant. So I've been focusing on trying to not explain through words the shift, but kind of like show through, you know, community events or like art installations or just like talking to people what the other side of the coin can be and where all we can journey and explore with cannabis.
Love that.
Yeah.
That's so cool. That makes me want to go home and get creative. Cool. Emma, as legal cannabis continues to sweep the nation, I'm just going to keep, like, you know, saying that that's happening. It is. In your opinion, what are some of the major missing components in educating new consumers?
I think education is the missing component. I mean, even in the discussion of like child safety and cannabis, education came up a lot, and I kept hearing that because it's so necessary to talk about it. And so in my education program that I created with Sativa Science Club to try to at least give the community a basic understanding of cannabis, it's so important to me to include the last component of this kind of compassionate client care, we call it. But really, it's just how do we talk to people about cannabis? We have spent the last century, more than the last century, not talking about it and like whispering about it and like coming up with kind of coded language, and there's been no accountability and no research. And so right now we're kind of like thrown into this industry where we now have to have conversations about it and we have to talk about the plant in a way that makes sense, right? And so that is the thing that's missing to me is, okay, how do we talk about this plant? How do we educate people, one, in a way that doesn't alienate them? Because a lot of consumers, especially growers in the illicit market, think they know a lot about weed. And sure, they may know a lot about growing weed, but actually when it comes to like the science behind cannabis, consumption, microdosing, all these things that I think it's important to advocate for and at least have conversations around, they really don't know much about that. And so I don't think that it does any service to the legal cannabis market to alienate those people. I am of the mind that we want to include as many people as possible, and so that also then necessitates us to create some kind of language that is also accessible to everyone when we talk about cannabis. Right now, from what I'm seeing, it is either like amazing research that's coming out, but very laden with scientific jargon that the lay consumer couldn't really digest. And then there's also the tons of blogs on the internet that are just riddled with misinformation. I mean, my favorite one is the Indica Sativa myth, which I talk about all the time.
You've got me talking about it constantly.
Good.
Everywhere I'm like, did you know that that's false?
Good.
Like on Instagram, everywhere. I'm like, that's not right information. Stop sharing this, and I tag you.
I know, and I love it. But it is information that is proliferated in the community that we need to begin to subvert, but again, do it in a way that really includes everyone, that's accessible to everyone. And because cannabis is a botanical medicine, it is a medicinal plant, I don't believe that we can move forward in the allopathic model, meaning that I don't think that it does service to the plant or the person consuming it to talk about it as a pharmaceutical, to talk about it as this dose will give you this reaction, because that's not true. It's highly variable, right? And you also have your situational awareness that's coming into play. How much fat did you eat? How much water did you drink? Who are you consuming with? Did you have a stressful day at work? Did you have an argument with your partner? All of those kinds of things get factored in to your personal relationship with cannabis. And moving forward in a way that we can educate people while also really helping them take back ownership of their own healthcare, of their own health and wellness experience, I think is the most exciting. And also the way that we can both service the plant and the people who consume it the most, to begin to encourage this relationship, this vulnerability with the person guiding you on the experience, the bud tender or the cannabis sales consultant who's telling you, okay, microdose, take 2.5 milligrams of THC, eat some fat with it, wait a couple of hours, and then journal about your experience. Be in touch with yourself, because ultimately you are the best educational tool that we've got. Your personal relationship with cannabis is yours. I mean, everybody has their own endocannabinoid receptor system. Everybody responds to cannabis differently because everybody has a different constitution, physical and also metaphysical. And so if we begin to look inside of ourselves, journal about our experience, and then also have programs that exist that can give these guides or these consultants some basic level understanding to begin to guide in a really informative, safe, and comfortable way for consumers, I think that is going to be the best way for us to move forward.
Yes. Love that.
Yeah.
Very cool. Thank you. Okay, so we have our last question here for Amy, and then we'll open up for some questions. So Amy is one of the top cannabis attorneys around. What can you share with us about how you view the current state of legal cannabis in the U.S., and furthermore, how can women navigate this legal space to get more involved?
So I think that we need to think even more broadly. It is my position that the United States is very quickly getting left behind in this conversation. And I just put together this chart of every country and what they can and cannot do, and what they are and are not doing. And
Can you send that to us?
I'm like, I want that.
And it's really, really interesting. So I think we need to think about even more broadly than just what we're doing in the United States, because we're doing exciting things, but we're so shackled compared to some of the other places. I read about a 1 million square foot facility in Israel this morning. That's amazing. And they are, Israel's doing amazing things, and Canada's doing great things, and Germany's starting to, and a bunch of countries in South and Central America are starting to, and we're kind of spinning our wheels. And I think we all know why that's happening. And so I think we all should be thinking very broadly. I don't think there's any question that legalization is sweeping the nation.
Good.
We saw, yeah, exactly. We saw in New Jersey, we saw a Democrat win the governor's office, and one of the platforms was that he was going to legalize cannabis in the first 100 days. So, we are seeing that happen, and I just met with somebody from Texas who's legitimately a Republican, and who actually thinks they're going to be legalization in Texas, and they're behind the scenes working on that, not pretend working on it, but really working on it. And I think we're going to start to see that pick up. And so, I do encourage all of you to, when you're watching what's happening, to think very globally, because this is a global issue.
I love how your answer is different than last year. Last year, you're like, I don't know what the hell is going to happen. Donald Trump just got here.
Yeah, I still don't know what's going to happen here.
Yeah.
And I think the second question is how women can get more involved. And so I divide that into some buckets. The first bucket is, how can you get more involved politically? And the answer is, you can get involved politically. And what I mean by that, even though I think it must be obvious, is that there are a number of opportunities to participate in groups that are working on political issues, either in this state or nationally or globally. And they can always use help. And they can always use you coming to an event. And they can always have you on a list so you can write a letter when something is happening that you don't want to happen. So I would encourage you that if you're interested in this space, you are all working apparently in this space. I don't know where the DEA is anymore, but they're not in this room. So like it used to be. So it seems like, from my perspective, you should all be involved. if you care about this space and you're working in this space, you should be an activist, period. And the level of comfort you have with that is up to you. Maybe it is writing a letter, or maybe it's going down to Salem, or maybe it's traveling with the OCA to DC on one of our DC trips and participating that way. There are a lot of opportunities politically. I think the second bucket is, how can you be a leader in the business space? And I spend a lot of time thinking about this because I am extremely frustrated. And if I had like an hour to talk to you, I would draw like an executive organizational chart on the board. It would look like an org chart, and we talk about all the places that like women do not live in that org chart right now in the cannabis industry. And so there are managers, there are executives, and there are boards, right? And women live almost nowhere in any of those places. And it's interesting, and I would urge you, if you are working for a company or you've started your own company, to start to think about what that organizational chart looks like and where you fall in it and how you can elevate yourself in it, or if you are in an executive position already, and we've heard Andi and Trista talk about it, how do you perpetuate keeping women in positions of power? And you should also feel free, because I do every single day, when you notice, and maybe not if you're like somebody's employee, you probably shouldn't do this, but any other time, you should ask, like, well, how many women do you have on your board? Why do you think you don't have any women on your board? How do you think a woman could contribute to this? We're not even talking about people of color yet. Like, you think women have it shitty in this industry. Like, if we were having an honest conversation about how people of color are being treated in this industry, we could talk about that the entire rest of the night. So I think how you can get more involved is by what I just said. Making sure that if you own a business that you're elevating women. That if you're part of a business, that you really look deeply into how that business is organized and how you can bring more women into positions of power. And I think third, and I said this already, I'm going to say it again, like, you should not be afraid to do something big. Like, you should not. So if you want to start your own business, go start your business. And do not let anybody stop you. If you want to go out and start an organization, like, go out and start an organization. Maybe it's going to suck and it'll fall apart, and then maybe you'll come back together and do something cooler, right? Yep. You should not be afraid. I think that we are very often taught that we should be, and I think this is, because this industry is so new, you can really do that. So that's the second bucket, which is bringing women into position of power. And the third bucket, I think, is the consumer piece. And it's not my area of expertise by any means. I don't work on that end. I don't advocate for consumers. I advocate for business owners. But I think what you guys are all talking about, which is coming into these places. From my perspective, the workplace is not a safe place. Like, I mean that in a myriad of different ways. The workplace is not a safe place for us. So we have to be brave, and we have to be courageous and outgoing and creative and do better, faster, stronger. But you can create safe places, and you can create places where everybody feels welcome. And so that's like your social obligation. So political, business, social, and to me, those are the three legs of the stool.
I love this. Okay, I love it. I just say I really wanted to ask one more quick question directed towards you that ties with this, and it's kind of selfish, but I feel like a lot of people will want to know this. So I'm about to accept investment, and finding a female investor is nearly impossible. So do you have any tips for me as a woman business owner who wants to maintain like as many women as possible in my business? Like, how do I navigate that?
So,
or like,
that's a great question.
Yeah.
So I think you should ask if you are like too narrowing the field by just accepting women investment. I think that we often think about taking investment money as relinquishing control, right?
Yeah.
So you're relinquishing ownership and you're relinquishing control. And I would urge you that you should you should look for a good partner, right? You should look for somebody who you like. They could be a man, they could be a woman, they could be any of those things in between. I think you find somebody who you feel good about. I don't think you have to look for a woman. I think that it's more about retaining your control. And so when you're taking investment money, you don't have to give up control. You don't have to give somebody voting rights. You don't have to give somebody the ability to make major decisions. You don't have to give those things up. You know, it's a give and take when you're having that conversation. So I would decide how comfortable you or you two feel about having somebody taking a little bit of that control. And maybe you say, you know what, if we found the right partner and they had this skill set we didn't have, we'd feel okay with that. But we want to make sure that we can always be the tiebreaker because we know we're going to be situated similarly every single time. Or you might say, you know what, I don't want to give up any control. We'll take a passive investor, we'll give a couple more points on the equity side. And then I think the other thing to consider is you don't always have to give up anything. So you can take debt, you could take convertible debt, you could take money in a bunch of different ways. So I would make it not so much about finding a woman who's investing in you, but how to retain your power as a woman-owned business to make the important decision for your company.
Awesome, I love that, thank you. And Ashley, the last one, and we'll open up for a question.
Yeah, and just from experience, exactly what Amy's saying, I've gone through 2 to 3 different scenarios where I did not have that advice when I made decisions about companies and organizations that I was ahead of, and now I no longer am. You have a community here, and there are events for you to go to. Talk to the people around you. There are people who will help you pro bono or in kind or in whatever way to give you the professional advice you need, because you can't figure it out between just the two of you. You need to talk to people who know what they're talking about, and sometimes you can't afford that in the beginning, but there's someone out there who will help you. So don't make decisions without talking to a professional.
I love that. Oh, thank you. I needed to hear that too. Okay, questions? Yeah, Becky?
Yeah, I'm thinking, as someone who writes on this industry, I've noticed just by chance I'm looking for the best topical companies. They happen to all be run by women. And we know that women are the major purchasers of health and wellness products for their families. How do we get women to just think of purchasing, let's say, cannabis cream instead of, let's say, a sports cream, and switch women into viewing this as a health and wellness products for their families?
Anyone have any thoughts on that?
I have a few thoughts on that.
Trista's like, welcome to my life.
Welcome to my world. Well, I think for us, it's all about educating women to begin with, right? Because women are the major consumers, like you said. So it's all about education, right, Emma? And really, that's it.
I can chime in here. I think like products like Trista's are really approachable. Their branding and their like tagline and everything, the image that they're putting out there, I think is way more powerful than a lot of people give credit to. That if it's approachable and maybe looks like something that someone's comfortable with, they're like, okay. Or like Andi was saying, who's had a bad weed brownie experience? Almost everybody, but who's had a bad weed ice cream experience? No one. It's about what, it's still the same, it could still happen just as often. Like there's no, it's just about what people think of it, or maybe what the stories are tied to that. Great question.
May I add something to that? So there are opportunities that we can take as volunteers, as consumers, and just friends in the community to educate our peers. We can go to senior homes, ask for permission to explain what you're there for, and teach folks.
I love that. I think
there are associations that'll let you come in and speak. You tell them you're a medical cannabis expert. Most of us in this room probably are in some capacity, and find out what you really know about, what you're passionate about, and share it. That's normalization. Yeah. That's the education portion that's missing.
I love that. And I think too, like even just starting with your own network is a great place to start, right? Like my grandma, I got my grandma on Empower. I got my whole family on Empower, and now they're like, okay. When they came out here, my mom was like, I would like to take puff pass and paint. Yes. I would like to get stoned and paint. Okay, I haven't done this in a really long time, but let's go for it. That's cool. You had a question?
Yeah, it's about, it's directed at Amy, but for everyone probably. when the panel first started, you discussed elevating women in the workplace and how if you see something, say something, things like that. How do you approach that, or how would you guide women who are afraid of some sort of retaliation in that regard? In whether it's from an HR perspective, firing, being just not.
So that's a great question. This is not legal advice. So a few things. Your company that you work for should always have an HR manual, period. And that HR manual should discuss things like sexual harassment. It should discuss, you should have an HR person, meaning that there should be somebody, say, free to go to who is not the person, hopefully, who is engaged in inappropriate conduct. The second thing is that you should write it down. So you should make sure when you start that you ask for that policy. We have a lot of situations like that, I think. So you ask for that policy, you make sure one is in place. If one is not in place, you ask for them to create one, and they should do that. They should have an HR handbook. The second thing is making sure that you have a safe person to go talk to. And by safe, I mean somebody who is there for the purpose of managing human relations for the business. And so I know that's hard when you're talking about very small companies, but even in a small company, if you run a small company, you should assign somebody that task. So maybe you're not working in a place that has 40 or 50 or 200 people, but there should be one person who is assigned that. And then you should make sure that you write it down, whether it's about another employee or about somebody in a position, a senior position, so you have a note moving forward. And it's not acceptable to be retaliated against. And if you are retaliated against, you probably have a cause of action.
So then you call her.
My question on that, I'm going to push it a little bit of not so much about misconduct necessarily, but being perceived as a nag or someone who's always complaining or someone who's always bringing up issues.
You know what,
and
guys?
Not being optimistic. But
Right.
this is real.
I know. You know what? Like, guys never worry about, and that we always have to worry about, is sounding like a bitch. And like, it's true.
I've been told in every job I've had to be more diplomatic.
Yeah, exactly. But it's okay if like your boss yells, right? So and I'm not saying your bosses yell.
No, I'm not
nice
talking.
guys. I did not say that.
I'm not talking anything about the company I work for.
I think that we need to. I mean, for me anyway, as somebody who can be very assertive and sometimes abrasive, and I recognize that if I was a guy or a girl, I'd probably be considered abrasive. I think that we have to like transition away from like caring about that. I mean, we are not nagging by asking for what we want with a strong
But
voice.
what if your job is at risk because of that?
Well, then you have a cause of action.
Then you sounds like you need a new job.
Well,
I know you're not talking about like your
then
amazing sweet
that-
cannabis team, but
then that is, if that's the case, then that is not a good long-term fit, and it won't ever be a good long-term fit. But more importantly, you're going to have your HR manual, you're going to have policies, you're going to have someone to go to, you're going to write it down, and if all that fails, then you need to leave and decide if you're going to take some action. But, I mean, I don't think we should be afraid of, like you said, being heard and speaking up. That's my feeling.
I love that. So it's 10 after, but I want to hit a couple more questions. Yep.
Hi.
Hey.
I just want a big fan of everyone's business. Thank you.
Yay.
I have a question that's directed towards Emma. As a bartender and with a background in some sort of holistic medicine and herbalism, how do you get a customer that previously would walk into Farma, slam $20 on the table, and be like, I just want to get effed up, but try to make a connection that it's not as simple as a THC number on the,
Great question.
Like, how do you make that connection that, look, just pay attention. You are going to be your own best guide as to, so how do you do that?
Yeah. My first thing is meet them where they're at. Meet every customer where they're at. If they come in and they want their quick pre-roll, and they want to get out, don't give them a sermon about terpenes because it will just annoy them.
Yeah.
And that's it. It will not sink in. If you have a customer who's like, I want the highest THC, the best for a bang for my buck, I'm going to get super fucked up.
Yeah.
The way that I deal with that is to pull out a flower, and the way that I have dealt with that is to pull out a cultivar that maybe doesn't have the highest percentage of THC and say, you know what, this one actually has a lot of myrcene, which is a terpene found in beer. Think of when you drink a few beers and you get like pretty like, whoa, you know? This one actually, from my personal experience, made me really stoned. And from my personal experience of working with customers in this way, it will create a miniature light bulb moment where they'll go, oh, well, how about that 29% THC cultivar? And I'll pull it out for them, and I'll talk about it and let them smell it and talk about terpenes. But if it's not the thing that got me most high or whatever, it wasn't the most intense experience for me, that resonates with customers because they do see the people on the other side of the counter as experts, somewhat. And so more often than not, they will ask you, what do you like? Because you smoke a ton. You have to. It's in your job description. And they will, like, they will rely on you for that information. And so that's the way that I usually handle that. And really this idea of just meet every customer where they're at. Not everyone's going to want the education, and that's okay.
Yeah.
I love that. Great answer. Tom, did you have a question? I see.
Thanks, guys, for doing this panel. It's really super educational. I had a question on the subject of the workplace discrimination, and just kind of bring up a personal experience. I've been in the cannabis space for quite a long while, even before OMP had dispensaries, and I experienced, really interesting discrimination just being physically disabled and hearing impaired, and it was really kind of something that you just had to roll with the punches because there's nothing or any body that you go to. And being a patient in a medical community, you thought that, you don't have the wider world advocating for you anyways, because you're just a little microcosm. And now that we have legal cannabis, it's a macrocosm. So when I continued to work in the space, I thought things would maybe be a little bit more evolved. And I took on some jobs that were underneath females. I took on jobs underneath males. And I found distortions in both places. There's no universality. And what I ended up kind of wondering is that there might be a new team of women and handicapped people and all the above to create like a equal opportunity employee manifesto or like a Bill of Rights for people to work in this space. And then it would just take one employee at every place to say that I advocate for this manifesto. And that if we can do this, that Amy had a really great thing. It's like, where is your HR code? Anywhere in the corporate world, you got a fallback person to go be an advocate when you're getting discriminated against. And I came from the corporate world, and being handicapped there, you get to see some crazy stuff there too. So it kind of is like, where can we start a conversation about what are the top 10 things we need to just feel safe in the workplace as anybody, let alone gender or whatever. And I just really appreciate the space here because it seems like any place I've ever been where it's majority men, there's no sense of space. You're in an industry, you're trying to make money, And follow-on comment to that is like, you ask the question, where do I find an investor that's female, right? I go to all these capitalist investor things. I think that's like it's the juiciest place in this cannabis world because people are fast moving in the money world. There's no women. There's no women in those places. You go, it's like literally all men. And I think it's cutthroat. It's a really cutthroat environment. And I think women don't want to be in that environment. It doesn't feel safe at all. I don't feel safe in a lot because it's money-driven people. And that's kind of like where money is the root of evil. Where can we get that Bill of Rights?
So
keep the evil in check.
I think that the first thing, those are really good points. Like I said, I've been touching this space since the 90s, before maybe the same time you have been. And I think, it's been very hard. I have two things to say. One, it's been very hard to transition. Like, this idea that, maybe you could make a bully complaint. Now you can. So, you're discriminated against, you should file a complaint. You have remedies now that you may not have had access to before, but we don't know that because people aren't really talking about it. So, I think the first thing to do is to create a place with those resources that are accessible so you know what your rights are, because you have hopefully a real employer, and that real employer has a tax ID number, and they have a business, and that business has to treat you right, and they can't treat you poorly, or you have a remedy. So I think that that's where you start, and then I think some very good creative people can talk about what it's like to create a portion of the employee manual that holds people to higher standards. I think the second thing is why there's no women in the capital markets is because there are very few women in the capital markets. And I would encourage all of you, so when you go and talk to investors, that you go and learn how to talk about raising money, because it's not fucking rocket science. So you should know how to have that conversation so you feel empowered, so you feel like you're not disadvantaged, because those guys can be dicks. Like, they really can. And so you should also not be ashamed that that's not your skill set. Like, they want you. They want you. They actually need you. So you might not know what the difference between a Series A and a Series C round is. Does not matter. You know how to grow, or you know how to make ice cream, or you know how to create this great event space, and they do not know how to do that. So you have what they want and need, and that puts you in a great position of power. And don't forget that. Don't ever forget that. So you might not know the technical stuff. Go read a book. And that way you feel like you can have that conversation. You're not disadvantaged. And then remember your own self-worth. But those guys are dicks. And it's not very
All right, everybody, thank you so much for coming and supporting Siren Nation and our Wild World of Weed panel. By doing so, by supporting Siren Nation and by supporting us, ladies in cannabis, you're directly encouraging and supporting women, the arts, and the overall wellness of our community. Each and every one of us has incredible power to impact the environment around us. So let's come together to use that power to change the world.